Thank you, Eric, Michelle, Ambassador Todd, for joining us today. The webinar is about digital transformation in mining, taking action. And I'll tell you more about why the focus is on action. But let me start by giving a little introduction of each of you, and then you can take a few minutes to talk about your background and what do you expect out of this webinar. Starting with you, Michelle, I won't speak much. I don't want to steal your thunder, but you have been my mentor for a long time. You were the CIO of Barrick before you took a position at Geovia as the CEO, which you are at, I think, more than 1.5 years with this company.
Nearly 3.
3 years. Oh, wow. Time does fly.
It's gone by.
Right. So feel free to share more about your experience with mining and what do you expect to get out of here.
Yeah, sure. So, for some of you, you might know me. It's hard for me to see exactly who's on the line, so yeah, my background, I've been in mining now 30 years. This year, in fact, 2022, I started 30 years ago. So, as you know, I've worked in different types of mining backgrounds, underground, open cut, bulk, so iron ore, coal, as well as all the metalliferous, copper, gold, zinc, lead, all of those. Started as a mining engineer, but subsequently not only gone into maintenance processing, but also now into technology, which I think has been an exciting transition for me. I did a lot of working with mining companies or being part of a mining company and really helping transform, typically through leader-led activities, changing the culture, focusing on productivity, continuous improvement, etc. Which I think the mining industry is great at continuous improvement. But now we're getting these disruptive changes. We're getting external challenges to our industry that we need to more rapidly adopt and rapidly respond to. And so now moving more into technology-enabled change. So still as much about changing the way we do things, changing the way we think, and adapting to some of these externalities, but now using technology to speed that rate of change up. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Michelle. Eric, Todd. So, Eric, I know you're the CEO of IWT, a company you started about 25 years. You have very, very strong background in communication technology and network. You're an engineer at heart and a business person from mind and character. And you have built this company that has been on Inc. magazine's fastest growing company for several, I think 4 times. I'll let you speak about yourself and IWT.
Sure. Thank you, Ash. Thank you, Michelle. Well, I'm probably the novice in the mining space. I would consider myself an entrepreneur and an innovator and a tech person. My background started at Motorola and then transitioned to GE and then Ericsson before starting IWT as a spinoff out of that group from Ericsson. But we had developed some pretty neat networking technology for the military that when the United States had 2 major accidents with Sago and Upper Big Branch in 2006, NIA saw the technology we had and really wanted us to look at it as a solution to solve the connectivity problem underground in the mining community. So we've only been in the mining space since about 2008. We have the largest number of deployments in connectivity and networking, connectivity and tracking in the United States. We are, as I mentioned, a spinoff out of GE, and we are really focused helping customers solve problems. So we play across a lot of spaces. Our main space to get into mining was networking and connectivity and mobile information mobility, which we think is really important. But more and more, we're having customers come to us asking, how can we use this data to provide situational awareness of our mines, our assets, asset performance management, and our people. And so that creates a lot of interesting applications around digital transformation, data at your fingertips, and IoT that supports some of the future trends for mining that we think are important, like teleremote and autonomous mining. So it's a pleasure to be here, and hopefully I can add some value in the conversation.
Thank you, Eric. And Ambassador Todd, you are a career diplomat. More than 30 years you have been into diplomacy. You have been an ambassador to Brazil, Ecuador, and you have served both Trump and Biden administration before converting into international business consultant. You're advising mining tech companies across the world. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, Ash, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you today and with Eric and with Michelle. I appreciate the invitation. And as you mentioned, I have been a career diplomat for 30 years, retiring from the U.S. government last year as U.S. ambassador to Brazil, and have just had the great privilege of representing our great country all across the world and worked with so many mining companies during that time. And that led to me joining the advisory board at Skycatch, which is a geospatial data analytics company out of San Francisco. And through that have been engaged with several mining companies talking about technology issues. And we met, Ash, you and I, at the Society for Mining Engineers in Utah last month. And I greatly enjoyed the opportunity to give the keynote on social license and the importance that represents for mining. Something that's always fascinated me is how mining companies face the challenge of how do you have government and community support for your projects that often are being interrupted overseas, and including here in the United States, and how important it is that technology plays its part in terms of not only improving the environmental performance of the mining industry, but also increasing transparency, because increasingly communities want to know what's going on down in that mine. And I really think that technology has a role to play. So I'm enjoying my interaction with the mining sector, hope to continue to deepen that, and look forward to the discussion today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to stick to this point for a second. I'll come back to what you just said about social license to operate, and I'm going to start the webinar with that point only. But before that, I wanted to thank everyone who is in the audience and who has taken time to listen to us. The objective of today's webinar is to share our insights, our learnings and lessons that you all can take away with you and do a little better and be a little better in terms of mining digital transformation. My name is Ash. I am the CEO of Symbiotic. We help mining companies, industrial forestry companies, forestry, agricultural, construction companies manage their fleet of mobile assets, Caterpillar, Komatsu vehicles, light-duty vehicles work better and be more sustainable by providing integrated end-to-end hardware, software, and AI solutions. I'm passionate. I was born in mining. My first job was in mining as an operator. I managed those machines for several years, and then I sold these machines for several years, and then I built my own startup to build AI software, and I've been in the AI software side for like 6 years now. So this is where I grew up. This is where I've seen problems from all different perspectives, and I cannot tell you how excited I am to be in the company of you all. So to start the conversation with you, Ambassador Todd, what is the undiplomatic truth in mining? Is mining industry missing the forest for the trees? As you rightly said, the projects are being not given clearance or approval for one thing or the another, despite mining is not an optional industry. It is not something that we can live without. It's an essential industry. It's an essential business. By existing, mining is doing a great service to the world. Why mining has to play a defensive role? Why don't mining get the support that it so much needs. It is a difficult industry. It's not easy. It's not as easy as manufacturing, where you have a fixed input and you are supposed to just control the output that matches more with the customer. In mining, you have variable input. The variability is off the charts. It needs all the love it can take, but it doesn't get it. So, what is that undiplomatic truth about mining?
Well, Ash, I think that sometimes it's challenging to address an industry and say some things about it that aren't necessarily wholly complimentary. And that if you're in the industry, you love the industry, you made a decision, you want to be in that industry. But as I said in my keynote at the Society of Mining Engineers, the mining process to most people looks ugly. It looks like it's polluting more than it's saving the earth. And it looks like it's very dangerous because you hear that a lot of people get injured, and you hear about illegal mining and mercury in the rivers. And, there's just so much bad news associated with the mining industry that most people hear. And one of the challenges in any industry or in any embassy or in any government is if you just listen to the people from your community, you're going to hear the things you want to hear. So it's real important to listen to other voices to understand why the industry has difficulty maintaining its social license overseas. You look
More
anywhere in
people get
South.
injured skiing than mining.
Well, yeah, and so, but people don't know that. They don't know that a lot more truck drivers die in the highways of the United States than they do in the mines of the United States. But you don't stop trucking. I mean, you just don't do that. So it's figuring out how do you present the industry in a way to the non-industry people so that you garner all of the positivity and social and governmental support so that the industry can continue to prosper. And one of the arguments I make is that the industry is underinvesting in terms of its public image. What is their advertising budget? You go to any industry, including the oil and gas industry, and I would argue they're investing a lot more in general branding and reputational benefit than is mining. So I think that's one thing that, again, if I were advising the industry, it's you got to invest in your image. Secondly, you have to figure out how do you use technology to provide more transparency, because people don't know what's going on in the mine. So then they just hear what the anti-mining crowd says about it without being contested. I shared in Utah how when I did a search for anti-mining protests, just do a Google search, you get thousands of images. And then you do a search on pro mining or for mining, protests or rallies or whatever, you get like 10 pictures. So it just demonstrates that there's a real image challenge that I think the industry has. But relevant to this discussion, it's about how do you use technology to build support for the mining activity. I know that most on the call are looking at efficiencies, how do you save money and all of that, and that's good. But I think bringing mining technology into a discussion of ESG and how important that is to the future of the industry is something that the leaders on this call could do much to advance the cause of mining globally.
I think that's a great point, and the key points on in your statements, Ambassador Todd, is there is so much goodness in mining that it needs support, that it requires support, and it needs to be understood. And mining is hard. Every time the mine goes a foot deeper, it is more expensive. It requires more resources. It requires more time and money to produce the same amount of output. So
Mm-hmm.
it's already very difficult business to be in. And it can use all technology it can use all the support it can use. The only thing that it should not be doing is wasting time on gaining people's trust or confidence.
Mm.
It should be 100% invested. So Michelle, my question to you is, you always talk about a burning platform. You always talk about that. Things are already visible from a mile away. that this industry needs to adopt technology. There are certain things that need to happen. My question is in four parts: 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. 1A,
Let's hope
what
I
needs to
remember.
be, I'll
Training.
ask one by one. So 1A is
Yeah.
what needs to be stopped, what this industry needs to stop doing in terms of being better at adopting technology, being better at improving itself. 1B is what needs to be unlearned. They have learned so many things. What needs to be unlearned? The 2A and 2B are the opposite. What needs to get started and what needs to be learned again. I'll repeat that if you forget, but the first part
Yeah.
is what needs to be stopped.
Mhm. So look, I think just to build on what Ambassador Todd said, um, I think there is a real challenge for our industry because we talk about it as a single industry, mining, everybody in the extraction process. But that spans everything from major corporations, BHP, Rio, Glencore, Barracks, the big organisations who have fantastic ESG records, are starting to do a lot of work in terms of digital, etc. They're more transparent, but I do accept and think that we as an industry need to be a lot more transparent. In fact, I use the terms radical transparency to allow people to see into our industry a lot more. But all the way from that through to artisanal miners, and that conjures up a lot of images around, uh, even very young people and in very challenging and difficult conditions. So I think one of the challenges for our industry is how do the least of us are the ones that set the image and the pace for what people think about our industry. So how do we collaborate much more as an industry? How do we step the entire industry up and do that much more rapidly? So I think there's a lot of work for us to do as an industry to be a lot more collaborative, to bring some of the more challenged parts of our industry into the light as such. And so, I think in that sense, to frame it in the way of your question, I think one of the things that we need to stop doing is segmenting our industry, segmenting it between different companies, segmenting it between different mines, saying that's the artisanal miners, that's not the industry, because for people outside the industry, they see it all as one. We are all about the extractive industry. And I think that the great thing is that digital can help us with that, not only create the radical transparency, but things like blockchain can help us track where goods come from. It can even help artisanal miners because of its process in terms of them legitimizing some of their products. There's a lot that we can do to bring some of those digital tools to the communities that we're working in, and therefore bring those communities up as well. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do if we stop segmenting our industry, and um, I think the other thing, the unlearning piece, because I think part of our challenge is also around how we perceive risk. But I think to speed this whole process up and get to be the industry we want to be faster, because I think most people who are in the industry, especially in the major parts of the industry and in subsistence parts of the industry, who are most probably just trying to feed their families, frankly. But the most of us, what we want to do is, we want to make a positive difference to the world. We want to be part of an industry that every person has to use every day, because that's the reality, whether you wash your teeth or drive a car or get on a bike or use some sneakers, all of that is in some way produced through mining. And we all want it to be the industry that helps rise 8 billion, 100, 10 billion, depending on your time frame, people out of poverty, and allows the world to continue increasing their standard of living. And we all want that to happen without breaking the planet. But in order for us to do that, we've got to much more rapidly change and much more rapidly adopt technologies. And in order to do that, one of the things we have to unlearn, because one of the things that mining is fantastic at is continuous improvement. We're really good at, especially miners that have run mines, we are great at when things go wrong, finding a solution and keep things working and get things back on track. And the way we do that is we apply what we have done in the past to problems that we have in the present, and that's what we need to rethink and to some extent unlearn. And we need to find more novel ways of solving our problems in the present, and we need to be able to do that in a way that makes some of those solutions not look riskier than the solutions that we have because they're tried and true. And so this issue around risk and how we think about the risks of what we do currently versus some of these new ways of doing things. So, a small but a very simple example is most people, when I talk to them in the industry and they're talking about replacing a truck fleet, for example, they talk, they'll say, well, my base case or my risky case is to replace it with, diesel trucks. Because there's no risk in diesel trucks. We know how to operate them, we know what they're like, etc. But I think, you've got to at least contemplate that if you're going to keep those trucks for 5 or 10 years at the rate that the world views ESG and views decarbonisation, etc., that you've got to contemplate there's at least some risk in replacing your diesel trucks with more diesel trucks and not looking at replacing with battery electric vehicles. Yet we don't think that way. And most boards won't think that way, and most investment committees won't think that way. So, we need to. That's one of the things we need to unlearn, is to apply zero risk to the way we currently do things, and think differently about those new ways of doing things.
I think that's a great point. No, go ahead, Michelle.
No, keep going.
So the first about what needs to stop segmenting and Ambassador Todd, I know you mentioned something about we are great as an industry to segment things out. We will buy something for our gold mine, but we won't buy something. The same thing for our copper mine. And something that works on one mine site in Chile, they won't let it function on the same mine site in Brazil, same commodity. So that segmentation is really real. So I'll let you speak a few minutes on that topic. But on the other note about the risk perception and the ability to take risks, my personal experience is that in our industry, everyone wants to be the first to come second. Nobody wants to be the first to come first. So everyone wants to say, hey, if you want to sell me something, tell me where else have you done it. So they're always looking for time-tested solutions, and innovation does not work that way. If something has worked really well at one site, it probably is not innovative enough. It probably is very, like you said, Michelle, incremental improvement, operational excellence. We are only incrementally improving. We are not making step changes. Step changes require taking risk, require investing something, your time and resources, and see how it works. If it doesn't work, it's fine. We tried. But that kind of mentality is not there from the risk ability perspective. I don't want to escalate this conversation to the CEO, board, and investment committee level, because the higher you take it, the uglier it gets. But even at an operating level, that risk assessment needs to have a different flavor. But Mr. Todd, over to you about segmentation and how it is hurting our community.
Well, I just find it fascinating that in most industries that I've worked with as ambassador, if you find something that works in one country, it gets quickly expanded by a multinational to the rest of the operation, because so many things are similar. I think Michelle was talking about this a little bit earlier, that every company in every country says, well, our situation is unique. And you kind of go, guess what? It's not unique. All right. Because I've worked in 10 countries, and I saw this in, Mozambique, Nigeria, Taiwan, all the places I've worked. So it's not as unique as you think it is. And so I think it takes somebody to come into the industry and help them realize very quickly that they do want to be seen as the ones implementing these innovations. But again, as I am learning, and from experts like Michelle, this is inherently a very conservative industry, which, when you look at the tech industry, it's not inherently a conservative industry. They work on speed. But then you take the mining industry and it's like, well, this is the way we did it for 10 years. And as Michelle just mentioned, the safest thing is to do it the same way for 10 years. So you have sort of a culture clash that I find, just as an observer looking at it, to be a fascinating kind of sociological situation. And I think it's really going to, the leaders in the industry, in my view, like in other industries, are going to be those that implement these technological solutions at scale the fastest. And Michelle has a lot more experience in this in terms of how the market reacts to that. But I think the industry has to help the markets understand why implementing the latest technology in a mine is as important as doing it in a computer company or in an automobile company. And it seems like that market understanding doesn't exist yet. And Michelle's helped me understand this better. But this is a time for the industry, and I'm very glad to see in the list of participants, there are several from outside of the United States, is figuring out how do you take this best technology, including from companies like Ash's, and apply it quickly, rather than waiting for several years before you do it. It's going to require leadership, and I hope many people that are on this video call today are gonna be part of that leadership team.
Yeah, for sure. And Eric, just to double click on this topic, it's an important thing. But I threw a curveball at Michelle, giving her 4 questions instead of 1, and she did tremendously well. So,
Don't give me 4.
I'll give you a sliver of that. So when you think about some of the things Investor Todd and Michelle talked about the challenges of adoption of tech, you built this company, your company IWT, from ground up, and you pioneered some of the technology, some tools that are now like those mining companies cannot live without. Tell me what you learned. Tell me what now the industry can do differently to adopt technology.
Well, Todd and Michelle teed it up well for me. When I was a keynote speaker at SME 2019, I talked a lot about the need for the mining industry to continue to innovate. And we got into the mining industry really because somebody at NIOSH saw some neat tech we had worked on for the military and said, why isn't the mining community embracing this? And, that I think is an important thing to what Michelle said about segmenting technology solutions. From my experience, innovation often occurs at the intersections of segments, not in your segment. I mean, if part of it, when I look at how we got into the mining space, we were trying to solve a problem for the warfighter in the caves of Tora Bora and in metro scale wide warfare. So when you talk about solving a problem that's a big problem of for the military, and then flip it into the mining segment, that becomes an innovation that no one really saw. And I think it's important to have discussions around those intersection of different markets. I think autonomous, a lot of the things you're seeing in autonomous in mining probably had roots in other market segments. I think a lot of it from a digital transformation in the use of data. Situational awareness situational awareness is a term I hear a lot from our customers, but it really started in the military, understanding where all your assets were. And a mine is a very difficult thing to do real-time asset performance management. And I look at asset performance as not just equipment and logistics, but it's people too. And so I tell my team a lot, fall forward fast, stay on the cutting edge, We're going to make mistakes, but you learn through taking risks, and you learn through making mistakes, and embrace the living on the tip of the spear, so to speak, from a constantly driving the industry in a different area. So I think conversations across industries are important. That's how I learn. We've got projects going on in robotics for warehouses and medical community and military and mining, and those are such fascinating things. You learn something new every day. So I'm just really repeating Todd and Michelle's from my own experience and perspective, but don't be afraid to test some projects, expect failure. The venture capital community, I've sat on the board at Center for Innovative Technology here in Virginia at the Commonwealth that funds and fuels startup companies. And, the mantra is we're going to bet on 10 companies and maybe 2 do really well and maybe 1 doesn't. But those 2 that do really well disrupt the entire industry. And we're not talking evolutionary steps. We're talking revolutionary steps into a brand new market or brand new space that we didn't even see before. It's really what you don't know, you don't know. And I think that's where innovation lies.
Yeah, I think some very, very good points, Eric. I'm going to come back to you with a follow-up question on what you just said. But before that, I want to make a comment here. And just to put things in perspective, mining industry spends about $100 billion towards unscheduled downtime of machines. And I'm only talking about mobile assets, as these vehicles. $100 billion every single year. 1 billion plus is the cost of unsafe incidents. And about 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide is offloaded to the environment by this industry. And these are not the numbers that have just emerged last year. We have been living with this for decades now. So that's a problem, big enough problem. And in your language, Michelle, it's a burning platform that is, it's been there. And nothing is happening. It's been there. These numbers don't change. And then there is a set of solutions that are out there in the market. Those who can potentially save this can help the companies, but the marriage is not happening. The adoption is not happening. That we are not seeing that rapid iteration of 10 technologies were tried, tested, 10 solutions were tried and tested, 4 failed, 6 were successful. And those 6 are going to be repeated by different operations. That stream and pipeline of investment and progression is not there. So I think that's the crux and the core of the problem, is that there is this gap. Now, there are different layers of this gap. Now, this gap is behavioral, this gap is cultural, this gap is, in your language, taught conservative industry, slow adoption, risk, ability to not understand risk properly. So that also is a reason. One small layer, and Eric, I come back to the question in a long way to that, is one layer is the lack of infrastructure. That because we don't have the basic necessities covered, like the Maslow's need triangle, if I do not even have a network connectivity at my mine site and someone comes in and say, I've got an artificial intelligence solution for you, and they said, dude, you're talking about something else. I don't even have my basic phone operating underground. So tell me something about what is the importance of infrastructure in enablement of advanced technology.
I think what we noticed first getting into the industry is that innovation in mining is mostly focused around the mining equipment and the big OEMs of how I can get a little bit more aggregate out and increase my tons per hour, or some small little amount of efficiency by changing my mining process. And I think the thing we found as we went to state-of-the-art manufacturing at Motorola and Ericsson at the time, 10 million phones went out of our facility, is without connectivity, you have no automation. And so the question we often ask customers is, what did you connectivity piece, or what kind of information mobility do you require? And the advancements in teleremote and autonomous mining and AI and IoT and big data, if you're not connected, it really has an impact on how well those technologies can be received and how well they can operate. We find that connectivity is most important, unfortunately, for most of our customers in the most hostile work environment where mining is actively being done. And that is not an easy solution to solve for networking. Just a typical example I'll boil down is you look at a soft aggregate market in the United States, they don't even have power in a lot of locations. So you are now crossing the boundary of how do I install a network when you don't have power where you need the network. So then you have to get, you have to be pretty innovative of how you're going to use battery operated or energy harvesting to come up with solutions that fit the need. Because at the end of the day, the use case, these folks are not networking people, they're not IT people, they're experts at mining, and they want a solution that's pretty easy and seamless, that doesn't change the way they work. It doesn't require a huge infrastructure investment. Meeting the connectivity solution with the use case is what we talk.
We lost Eric, I guess. Oh, you're back, Eric. We lost you for a second.
Oh, well, I think it's important for advancement in innovation in mining that connectivity is a piece of it. And so we all often start with, tell us about your mining process, tell us about your workflows. We want to understand your mining environment and then find the best networking solution for your environment.
Fantastic. Thanks, Eric. And I'm coming back to you, Michelle, and then over to you, Investor Todd. Michelle, how do you see, what's the price? There is one thing that there is a need and necessity. There is a burning platform that needs to be addressed. But what's the price? What is to be gained if mining becomes more receptive to new innovative ideas, has better risk assessment? What's the price?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I think this is the part of the debate, part of the challenge, and I think one of the things that we don't do so well, so one of the things we need to learn to do better in the industry, and I would say there were two things. One is really think about some of these business cases in a more systemic and holistic way. Because, for example, it's really easy to knock out a comm system by sort of going, well, I'm going to have to spend, $2 million, let's say, if you're at a bigger mine, to put in a comm system, and I'm only going to get, this small incremental improvement. Maybe I'll increase productivity by, I think the last person I spoke to was saying to me, I'll increase productivity maybe by 3%. And if you work that maths out, it's not a fantastic payback. But if we think about that more holistically, and certainly the things that I've seen is once you get some of those backbones in place, then the solutions you can find for problems you didn't even know you had, increase your payback and your productivity unbelievably. So, again, a very small example. I know of an organisation that implemented a comm system and gave everybody Apple iPhones to enter in data so that they could do short interval control. Now, the short interval control was justified by a 30% increase in productivity up shaft, and that was roughly about what they got, which is a little bit of one of our challenges as well, because sometimes our variation is so much that it's hard to even quantify some of these improvements. So that's a challenge, and I'll come back to that in a second. And so they're all sort of ticking, going, yes, we got that productivity, but some of the improvements that then started flowing in terms of guys, rather than using radios, because it's always hard to get on the radios, they would call their supervisor, who might be 2 hours away in terms of across the other side of the mine. They would show them some video of a problem that they were having, because they can FaceTime now. They could engage a couple of engineers in that conversation, all without people having to move, all within sort of 10 or 20 minutes they can solve this problem. And now a maintainer that has all the parts and all the things that they need, etc., can start coming across and help fix this problem. So suddenly the downtime of this equipment went from typically sort of 6 hours to sort of an hour, in terms of some of these problems or some of these challenges. And that's just a very small example. So I think part of it is around how do we build the business cases, so that we can really justify some of these improvements. I think a second part of the challenge or the puzzle is that we spend so much time focusing on the technology, and part of that's because we're engineers and we're accountants and all of that sort of stuff. That we forget that the technology is about 25% of the solution, frankly, and due respect to Eric and Ash and the fantastic things that you guys have developed, and an important part. So, don't let me undermine the technology. But the other 75% is how we implement that technology into our organizations. And so it's how do we change the work processes? How do we change people's behavior? How do we get them to do something different? How do we make that technology really exciting and alluring and desirable and something people want to use more rapidly? And, and that gets to this idea around, trial 10 pieces of technology, work out which ones are going to work best for you, think about how you might integrate them, do that fast, do that agile, don't create this massive waterfall sort of thing. But then once you've got the technology, and coming back to Ambassador Todd's point, once you've got the technology, you've got the solution that you want, you've got the behaviors and the desirability, then don't just treat it like a proof of concept. So we did it in this one mine. Now, the real challenge for mining companies is not how do you implement that piece of technology in one mine to solve that one problem, but how do I now solve it or use that same solution across my 2 mines, 3 mines, 5 mines, 10 mines? Because that's where you get scale, frankly, from all of that investment that you've just put in to find the problem, find the solutions, get people do it, make it alluring, get people to do something differently. So that's what mining companies should be focusing on, not on the technology. We should be putting these problems out there, saying, technology providers, world, these are the sorts of solutions we need. These are the sorts of problems we need. Help me find solutions. What we should be doing is working out how do we then drive those solutions across our business, across our industry, helping support, the other mining companies to also understand some of those solutions, etc. So I think that some of those things are part of the challenge, and part of the way we need to change. So it's this hyper collaboration idea as well, or collaboration at speed across the industry. But we can be very coy between mines, between the mine and the mill, between companies, across the industry.
The tribes within tribes.
Yeah.
Can I, Ash, I just want to give you guys some quantifiable numbers on what Michelle said, because I think it's important. We started selling connectivity solutions in the mining space based on cost of ownership, which is easy to quantify, and that ROI is somewhere, 12 to 24 months. But we started deploying systems, and we started looking at it from a productivity standpoint, and that ROI was in like 3 to 4 months. And so it's exactly what Michelle said, is we actually weren't even selling on the right value proposition. And you learned from this transition, when somebody went from an older system to a new system, you could measure the tons per man-hour output difference. And there's new insights. Once you have all this data, you find new insights to problems you didn't even know you had. So
Yeah, I think that that's a wonderful point, Eric. And Michelle, you have touched upon a couple things. Um, Before I follow up, I want to say to all the participants and all the attendees on this webinar, please feel free to post your questions. So we are going to very soon open for question and answers. I'm not very good at asking questions, so I'm going to outsource that activity to you all. But I'll just say this, that when we means all of us, the community, uh, humanity, when we bought iPhone in the first place, we thought it is going to be a better BlackBerry. But imagine what iPhone was supposed to do at that time versus what it does today. No one had that imagination, neither the user nor the inventor. It was only possible because the economy of scale was there, because the trust got established, that the user and the seller trust each other, that there is something more than what I can see right now, that there is going to be innovation that is going to be layered and layered and layered. And ultimately, I'm going to reap that benefit of innovation. Mining industry and any other core industry for that matter. And I'm going to include the machine manufacturers, OEMs. They suck at innovation. They just quit. They should quit. They suck at innovation. They can't build new software. They're not into software. They're into copper making. They're into machine making. Software making or AI making, it's a different art. It's a different scale problem. So that should be, that is someone else's the forte. But this not enough trust between a buyer and a seller, that if I'm buying something, it's going to continually grow and improve, and I'm going to get the desired value. Tesla would not be here if not for the fans of Tesla, who would buy the car even when there were not enough chargers on the road, and they would really suffer from lack of charge. But they still showed trust, and now Tesla is where it is today. I think that kind of trust is something that is needed, that, okay, I'm going to buy an operating system, I'm going to buy a platform, and that platform is going to grow into something better that I can't even see today. And let me go and try it. We are trying to create that kind of operating system, just like Apple. We have hardware, we have software, and we are building AI stuff. All we need is just a little love, a little trust from the community, and we are going to do wonders. But again, to come back to you, Michelle and Todd, so how do you solve this? That there are certain ROI calculations that are missing our viewpoint right now. That we don't know what we don't know, and we are evaluating new ideas based on the unclear information or improper information. How do we solve this? Anyone
Yeah,
of
so
you, Todd or Michelle? Yeah.
if I jump in and let Todd have a chance to sort of think about it, but because since I raised the challenge, but I think part of it is starting small. So the whole MVP idea, I think, is a good one, where you start with something that you know is going to add value. You know, you start small and then you think how to build, you know, once you've got that inculcated. So it is this layering. Now that requires us as an industry to have our people, so from a cultural perspective, used to continuous improvement, used to continuous change, and just little by little. And we're used to that in our private lives. I mean, nobody uses the apps that they used 2 years ago on their phones anymore. They will be new, they'll be refreshed, they'll be updated. They must be, you've mostly got rid of some and gone on to others. But be able to do it in that small incremental way of layering some of these technologies. So I think part of that is because then you can get to value, and then you can build beyond that. I think part of the challenge, though, is also trying to focus on some of the right problems. So, you know, what are some of those high value problems that we could work on and that we want to work on that will leverage us significant or most of the value. Because I find sometimes we get distracted as an industry with all sorts of different problems that we could be working on. And then, I think the other part is around, and I think there's a question in here about R&D and is the industry doing enough R&D? So I'm going to inadvertently answer that question as well. I think both yes and no. So, again, for me, I wouldn't be doing R&D in our industry if there are already other industries or better still retail doing that R&D. So like literally I would use iPhones rather than invent a new phone. I would use, off the shelf commercial products as much as I can. I would leverage the space industry who are solving some of these tele-remote problems or, robustness of machinery problems because, you can't pop down to space to fix your machine, so they're going to have to be much more robust. We're a bit slack because we can just pop down to the bottom of our mine and drag out a machine that's broken. So I would use some of those other industries and leverage some of the things that they're doing on the R&D side. But there are some parts of our industry that we do have to do the R&D because it's peculiar to our industry. So, think about our industry. The two things that are peculiar to our industry that aren't found in any other industries is metal extraction. So how do I take that atom that is locked in a mineral or in some mineralogy and how do I pull that out? Because it's the atom of copper or zinc or nickel that we want. And preferably, how do I do that without moving any of the rest of the material? That's nirvana. So that extraction, metallurgy extraction processes, we really need to, as an industry, I think, spend a lot more effort in that space, because one of the things that drives some of the economics and drives the ability for us not to do things radically differently is the fact that we're still building the same old processing plants that cost anywhere between $500 million and $4 billion at a time. And if we can rethink that, if we can be much more precise, then we can radically rethink the way that we do our industry. And then the other one that's very different to us is resource economics. Other industries want to know geology because they want to build a foundation on it, or they want to contain something, or they want to find the holes, let's say. But we're the only ones that want to economically define a blob within the earth. Because that's what an ore body is. It's an economic concept.
That's the fundamental definition of ore.
Yeah, exactly.
The economic viability, yeah.
That is the stuff that we want to, I think, and again, spend more research and R&D on. And even better still, if we could solve that conundrum, which is how do we find things faster, so know more about where these things exist, and how do we find them more precisely down to the last gram, down to the last meter. If we could do that, then a lot of the chaos that we're trying to solve for at the moment in our industry, all of the production ups and downs, the changes, the 1 billion or 100 billion, sorry, which is about the same we spend on exploration each year actually, but all of that would disappear, and we would look a lot more like manufacturing, and therefore be able to, be a lot more planned, organised, orderly, etc. So they're the two areas that I think, as an industry, we should be doing a lot more R&D on. The rest, I would beg, borrow, steal, leverage.
No, 100%. And to the audience in the United States, when Michelle mentioned gram and meter, she meant pounds and miles or feet.
Sorry, I'm metric all the way. I do still do ounces for gold, though. So, that's the one non-metric unit, which used to confuse the Chinese all the time. They'd sit there going, Michelle, why are you working in ounces only for gold?
But Ambassador Todd, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, Ash, let me just say real briefly, again, bringing a slightly different perspective to this, is what I find astounding is that in most every other industry, you do not want to advertise the fact that we are the slowest adopters of new technology. That every other industry wants to lead with, we are the most technologically advanced aviation company, the most technologically advanced, consumer products company, and why there's not a competition for that moniker in mining companies. I mean, if I'm the CEO of a mining company, I want to be the CEO of the mining company that is the most technologically advanced. But I don't see that competition taking place. And that's a head scratcher for me. And secondly, something I find very surprising is that people are not factoring in the cost of not adopting the technology. And let me explain. Mining has disasters. It has tailing dams disasters. It has all these things that end up costing a lot of money. And so from a reputation standpoint, if there is a disaster and somebody says, well, you didn't use the latest technology, how do you defend that? You don't. You lose. You lose a lot of money because of the disaster, and you lose reputationally because you saved a few $1 million by not putting in that $2 million communication system when 100 miners got trapped underground. I mean, how do you defend yourself? You don't. You lose big time. And I do not think that, again, on my developing understanding of the industry, is that risk is not being entertained. The reputational risk of disasters that could have been prevented by, let's call it, off-the-shelf technology for the mining sector. And maybe it's just that engineers don't think that way, but talk to your lawyers and talk to your public relations firms, and they're going to tell you, you better be sure that if that technology exists, we have to buy it, or else we'll be questioned as to why we didn't.
I think it goes back to, sorry, I think it goes back to Michelle's earlier point about the whole investors community and other community, that they're not even asking these questions. They're not holding the dam company, mining company accountable and said, there were tools available. Tell me, what did you do to prevent this? Sorry, I go.
Well, they'll be answering those questions in court if there's a problem, or they'll be answering those questions on CNBC or Fox Business when they're called to answer those questions. And either side, they lose when a small percentage of the investment could have been made before, just to say we're the most technologically advanced company.
Yeah, it's another American thing. When you say CNBC, you have to say Fox News.
Yeah. I am a trained diplomat after all.
I think the challenge that, not to let the innovation companies get off the hook. I think the challenge in the 14 years we've been in the mining space for us is we had to change the way we communicated innovation and put it in terms that the mining community was used to measuring. And I'll describe this very short story. I went into a general manager of a top 5 underground miner in the U.S., and I was excited to share with him that we saved him $750,000 a year on operating costs. And he was like, man, that's good. Somebody at corporate got a bonus. And I'm like, how can he not be excited about that recurring savings? Well, what he didn't know is I had also had all his productivity gains since he put in the system. And he said, Eric, this mine, every hour it's down, cost me $188,000. So that's 4 hours of downtime. So as a technology provider, he wasn't interested in, the total cost savings because it was in the noise of his overall problem statement. What I was able to flip around with him is when I showed him the $10 million a quarter production gain, then he got really excited. And of course, he jumped right ahead and said, you want to say it's because your system? And I said, I don't need to say it because it's my system. If you can only give me 25% credit because you have a better connectivity solution in your mind, we're good. And so the challenge for an innovative company or a technology company, I think, is we also have to change our messaging in terms of our audience. And that's on us.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think we have 5-6 minutes above the hour. Are you guys okay if we wait another 10 minutes for the questions to come from the audience? Okay, so to the audience, please raise your hand or message, and we can open the microphone for you to ask questions to any of us directly. But until you do that, I'll say this. I think the tech companies, Michelle, your company, Eric, you and my company, we exist to invent on behalf of the industry. We invent for them because we know that it's not their job to invent. It's not their job to come up with new exciting solutions. What are your thoughts on the, if we stay focused on the asset in the mind, like machines, machine manufacturers? I worked with a machine manufacturer for several years, and I'm not speaking for them or about them. I'm speaking in general, that in terms of innovation, all we have seen is bigger machines. The trucks got bigger, that's innovation. The mills got bigger, that's innovation. The pumps got bigger, that's innovation. We did not see really something innovative enough that can change the game, not the game, but radical difference or a step change. Even the autonomous trucks that were brought in Australia, that were to solve the problem of high salary for the drivers. That's why, apart from Australia, there is not major uptake for that autonomous fleet. So what are your guys' thought on the tech companies like us? We exist to invent on behalf of our customers, and what is the role of the machine manufacturers in leading the charge for innovation?
Yes, so I think I think a lot of the problems that we're trying to solve, and I'll make an extreme statement, but I think I'm pretty close. None of them can be solved by any one company, and I think continuing to attempt to do that is causing some of the delays, and I think some of the issues that we're facing. So I think as an industry, and I'll keep coming back to this collaboration thing, but I think as an industry we need to collaborate a lot better, and that means across suppliers of different pieces of the puzzle. So, in this case, OEMs, it might be software providers, it might be mining companies, etc., to solve some of these problems. Because what I see is equipment manufacturers trying to be software companies sort of trying to be get into hardware, and mining companies, as I said, trying to be technologists rather than be good mining companies and help solve those, implement those solutions and work with our people, etc. I mean, really what mining companies have always been fantastic at, or should be fantastic at, is integration. So how do they integrate all of these solutions, or help create some of these problem statements and solutions? So I think working together to solve the pieces of the problem is the way to get to the solution set faster. And everybody trying to invent the same thing just because they want a bigger part of people's wallet, or they want, they want to own the space and lock everybody out. That's all bad actor stuff in my view, and not helpful ultimately to our industry. And the mining industry has to stop their bad actor stuff as well, because we also are pretty good at encouraging the growth of suppliers, and then the second we think we've got a leverage on them, we try to grind the price down, and we saw that with contractors, the way we used contractors in the 90s and 2000s, and then now we wonder why we've got so few contractors within our industry, and we had this whole consolidation thing. So I think we all need to think thoughtfully about, who's got what IP, what's the appropriate, margins, etc., that people should make, so that everybody is encouraged to continue to provide solutions, solve those problems, use those solution sets, etc. And I think that requires a lot more sophistication, a lot more collaboration, and working together to solve some of these problems.
Fantastic perspective. Thank you, Michelle. And anything else from you, Eric, Todd? Okay, I'm going to do this. I know that all three of you are responding to the questions that we have in the chat box, but I don't know if those answers are visible to all the participants. So I'll read them out aloud for the benefit of the audience. But before I do that, there is an interesting question that I think it's our duty to respond to. Now, in our industry, we are seeing that there's a talent shift, that a workforce and a generation is retiring, and new generation is entering. That also is a definitely not a burning platform, but a very significant, not a problem, but a reason to invent and investigate, and what kind of environment we are providing to these Gen X, Gen Z employees who have a choice to go to Uber and Facebook and that kind of companies. Why would they show up to a mining environment? So the question is, on that note, is what advice would we give to a business student who is planning to start a career in mining industry? What are the two most important challenges that industry is trying to solve, and how can these business students, an MBA, getting into mining industry, what can they help this industry with? This is a beautiful question.
Two. I think that's the challenge, is getting it down to two. So there's two technical problems. So, the one I raised before around how do we find ore bodies faster? 20 times as fast, half the price, down to the last gram, down to the last meter. And the reason for that is, as an industry, we are not replacing or replenishing ourselves. So it's a little bit like we've got a store of cornflakes, but we're using the cornflakes off the shelf, but we're not restocking the shelves fast enough. It is literally what's going on, and that's especially true for copper and some of those minerals for decarbonisation. So the world literally does not have enough copper if we wish to decarbonise, even if we suddenly did 100% recycling. So that one, and then the other one is, how do we more precisely extract those atoms? Because if we could just take the copper out of the ground, let's say, and leave everything else, our environmental impact, our costs, etc., would radically change. But I absolutely accept what Ambassador Todd has said as well, which is, we have an image problem in mining. And I know a couple of years ago I facetiously said that what we need in mining is like a movie or a series or something, because they managed to make serial killers sexy with Dexter. And we haven't managed to make the mining industry sexy. But so what does that say about our industry? So we need a good Netflix series or something. But we do have this image problem that we need to resolve and work on. And we've got a great opportunity, because in decarbonisation, we can absolutely lead the charge. And this whole ESG metrics, and we can certainly lead the charge in terms of transparency, etc., of those, both because we are consumers of energy, and one of the ways a lot of the industry has got rid of some of their scope 2 emissions is to build solos, to build wind, to build renewable, because we effectively build little towns. That's what we do as an industry, because we go into isolated places and we have to construct everything. We build even the towns around us for the communities that we're in. So, there's so much we can do both as consumers, scope 2 emissions and reduction of scope 2 emissions, as well as leading the charge in terms of bringing those metals to the world that would help some of that image problem.
And Eric, you have spoken to students at the graduating ceremony as the keynote and the guest speaker. What advice would you give to an incoming MBA student to mining industry?
Well, if you watch my commencement speech, it was take a risk, right? I mean, which is what we've all talked. We've been in the pandemic and COVID for 2 years, and all we've heard is safety and part of my speech was focused on, don't forget, innovation comes through risk taking, and if we're afraid to take risks, then we're not going to innovate. So I think as a business student, here's the opportunity that I see. A lot of innovation has occurred in manufacturing. It's that history of case studies and performance and continuing process improvement led to just in time today, which I think is actually going to turn around a little bit. But there's a lot of research in that field of continuous process improvement that, if you look in mining, and Michelle touched on a little bit with short session intervals, time studies, the challenge our customers typically have is they have one industrial engineer to support 2 or 3 mines. And the data that the industrial engineer gets his hands on, or the process improvement person, I'll say, is often not correct, or I've heard customers call it the book of lies, right? Because the foreman puts in whatever he knows management needs to see, and the same shift report and the same advancement report looks the same day over day, year over year. And so when you're looking at bad data to make continuous process decisions, you don't have a good barometer or compass to make those decisions. So one of the things that I think manufacturing has done, they've automated a lot of that data collection. And that's why, we say connectivity is so important, because with IoT, there are a ton of things that we can collect while removing the person in the loop of the collection process. So, and that's the first step to digitization. So that's where I think the opportunities are for young, eager MBAs to get in there and say, look at this 20, 30 years of best practices in manufacturing, and mining is, it's a production floor. It's taking an asset and going all through a logistics mining process and power plant or a plant. So that would be an opportunity in identifying the missing pieces to make that a reality.
That's fantastic. And Eric, thank you. Michelle, to your point about Netflix making a movie, they just lost 2 million subscribers, so maybe it's
yeah, they're not happy.
It's time for them.
They put that gold movie on again, so
Yeah. But I'm going to read a couple more questions, and then we can go from there. So, Mr. Todd, I think this might be something that you may join Eric. Eric has already responded to this, but what impact do you think the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine would have on global mining, as its impacts are going to be felt for a long time? Do you think our mines will be more stressed out in producing ore and avoid adoption of these technologies for a while?
Complicated situation with Ukraine and Russia, of course. But what it does reveal is an overdependence that the industry has on Russia, and the importance of developing reliable partners. Something that I used often when discussing the challenges related to supply chain with communist China is that if you work in problematic countries, by definition, it means you're going to have problems. I mean, that's just the definition. And so what I don't think the industry does the greatest job of doing is analyzing political risk and understanding that, if you have to pay 10% more in Nevada you want to do that if you don't have to go to the Congo or whatever. It's figuring out that these kinds of countries are risky. Now, of course, you are going to take that into consideration when you're making your investment decision. But if you're putting money in Russia, you got to know that it's highly likely that you're going to run into some problems that you don't anticipate, whether it's corruption, whether it's political risk, whether it's instability, whether it's they're invading a neighboring country. It's going to impact. And I would encourage the industry to look to mine in places that are more stable, that are closer to home, that aren't going to be subjected to these kinds of things. So I think that, again, bottom line, problematic countries are guaranteed to give you problems. And the industry, I think, needs to do a bit better job of understanding political risk and how to address it.
Thank you very much. There are a lot more questions, but probably we do not have time to go through all of them. So with your permission, I will end this webinar and offer you my heartfelt gratitude for being here and taking time to discuss interesting ideas and thoughts and sharing your perspectives. I am sure that the attendees have got what they came here for. They are getting away with something meaningful. The recording of this session will be on Symbotic's website, and we'll post it on LinkedIn as well for anyone who would try to register and they could not show up. But again, thank you very much to all of you. And I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much. Best wishes to all.
Thank you for attendees.
Thank you. Stay safe.